And I'm Dr. George Simon, and welcome to another edition of Character Matters, the program where we talk about what I consider to be the defining issue of our time, character crisis that we face, and that affects so many aspects of our lives. And today, you can enter the green room and participate live uh, by just clicking on the link that you'll find in my latest post at drgeorgesimon.com, or you can also find the link scrolling at the bottom of the screen here. And I'm happy to have you participate. We've got a lot to talk about this week. I've been posting on a new series on the topic of genuine love and what it's really all about, and especially why some disturbed characters, individuals with certain personality traits, find it difficult in their hearts to really be able to love. And we're going to talk about all of what I call love's close cousins and some of its imposters. And we're going to talk about narcissism and why certain narcissistic traits make it very difficult for someone to genuinely love, among other things. But I invite you to join the conversation. And once again, you'll find the link to enter the studio in the description on YouTube. Also, in the latest article, the latest post at drgeorgesimon.com, and also scrolling at the bottom of the page here, at the bottom of the screen. Just cut and paste that link into your browser, and you'll enter the green room, and we can have a live conversation. I see that we already have somebody in the green room, somebody who I know and think a whole lot of. Her camera is off just now, so I'm not sure she's ready to say anything. Oh, there she is. I'm going to go ahead and add Caroline to the stage. Welcome to Character Matters.
Thank you. Hi, George.
Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
I was wondering if you had a comment about the topic that we're going to be talking about today and in the next few programs.
Well, I think it's a very important topic that we encounter actually much more often than we might think. And yeah, that's all I'm going to say at this point.
Okay. I'd like to get your comments on a couple of remarks I'd like to make. First, you know, it's taken a long time, both professionally and personally, for me to have some awareness about the real nature of love, because as I mentioned in a few articles, it has so many close cousins and some imposters too. That's what I like to call them. And what I have learned through my professional career is that many times at the front end of a relationship, a person gets what these days people are calling love bombed. That is, the person that they're involved with shows perhaps a lot of interest, a lot of affection, listens intently, spends amiable time, shows an awful lot of interest and desire. All of those things can make it seem like genuine love is present. Now, I'm not saying that those things can't accompany real love. They often do. And they often inspire real love. But in and of themselves, they're not. A person can be interested in you for a wide variety of reasons. And they can have designs on you for a wide variety of reasons. Some of them having little, if anything, to do with love. I think of the shyster Bernie Madoff. I was blocking on his name for a minute. He had a great deal of interest in the persons that he was developing relationships with. His interest was to get a hold of their money. And he had a great deal of charm and charisma that he displayed, showed genuine concern, or appeared to show genuine concern for his client's welfare, but his motives were, as we now know, not very pure. So even though those sentiments can accompany love, they're not in themselves love. And discerning love's real nature is something that most people do in relationships after the fact. And they also discern in relationships after the fact what their partners are really like in overall character. Once the mystique is seen through, and once all of the projections that we might make on people have diminished, and we begin to see them more for who they are, it becomes apparent what their character is actually made up of. And certain individuals have a real problem genuinely loving, especially individuals with certain kinds of narcissism in their character. They can show all kinds of interest in you for a lot of reasons, but mostly self-serving reasons. And love in its essence, genuine love in its essence, is not self-serving. It's self-emptying, it's self-giving, as opposed to self-serving. And many times it can get to be a mutual thing. Many times an individual who is in the process of what we now call love bombing will shower you with all kinds of attention and affection in a self-serving way, really, hoping to get something back from you. It's so easy at the early stages of a relationship to get bowled over by a lot of things because we human beings have needs. And when someone appears to be meeting those needs, unless we know ourselves very, very well, and unless we're deeply aware of all that's going on, it's hard to make a genuine, free, and fully informed choice within a relationship. Now, I know I'm talking kind of esoteric here, and we could use some more practical examples, but I hope I'm expressing myself clearly enough. I don't know if you have any comments to that, Caroline.
No, I agree. I mean, we are very susceptible to love bombing because I think we all crave that connection with somebody else, but often it's really with ourselves. So then we project it onto other people or within something higher than ourselves, within ourselves. And so that makes us kind of vulnerable to that sort of, I would say it's almost a sort of attachment,
Yes. Which can and often does become kind of an addiction, where the person feels like they can't even make it without the other person, where they've projected so much onto that person about what they're really trying to connect with in themselves, as you just pointed out, that it gets to be perhaps a self-defeating habit. And that's how I know some books have been written about how you get addicted to a person, but that's generally how people become addicted to a person. Yeah. So, any rate, I wanted to talk about another character quality that some folks unfortunately come across too late in a relationship after they've already invested quite a bit in the relationship. I call that investment syndrome the slot machine syndrome, where much like operating a slot machine or being lured by a slot machine, you're always thinking that at some point there is going to be a payoff, or at least you're hoping for that. And then every now and then you get just a little bit of a payoff that makes you think the big one might be coming. And that's to keep you hooked as you invest and as you invest and invest. And that happens in relationships too. And it usually happens in relationships where on the front end of the relationship, there's some powerful attraction for some reason. The promise of something that the person craves, that either they've projected onto the person or that they actually see as potential in the person, whether it's real or not. And that begins the syndrome. And that's particularly common in situations where the other relationship partner has the gifts of amiability and charm and charisma. These are talents that can be honed, refined, and that some people come by quite naturally. They have a way about them that's easy, that appears non-threatening, that even seems inviting. Um, we back in distant times, we talked about folks who are capable of casting spells, of being mesmerizing. Sometimes all it took was a glance that seemed so affirming and so endearing that without even the person doing anything to prove who they were in character, you became smitten. And this happens, unfortunately, quite a bit at the outset of a relationship. And it's only after, betrayals, subtle forms of abuse, subtle manipulations, et cetera, within the relationship that the person comes to appreciate what the person that they once thought hung the moon is really like in character. And there are some narcissistic individuals who are really adept at what we call positive impression management. They have all the charm and charisma in the world. And even some of the most dangerous narcissists, some of the most malignant, sociopathic, even psychopathic kinds of individuals can have this charm and charisma. Sometimes it's kind of superficial, but sometimes it appears so real that you're taken in. And even though some of us have an intuition that tells us maybe something isn't quite right, we might be prone to ignore that intuition because of the level of the person's charm and charisma. So we dismiss any churning in our gut because we're so positively impressed and impression managed by the person. I don't know if you've come across somebody like that, but unfortunately, in our day and time, there are plenty of folks who have that capacity for what we call positive impression management. Yeah. So, did you have a particular question that you wanted to ask?
Me or
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
yeah. No, it just reminded me, like your book kind of introduced me to psychological manipulation. That's kind of like what I'm working on. And so it reminded me of, for psychological manipulation to work, there needs to be a manipulator and somebody who is manipulated. It's quite a predatory behavior. And one thing that the predators always do is grooming. And that's what I thought about when you talked about what is it, positive impression management,
Yes.
because most manipulators are often quite well versed in that, and they use it to prime and groom the environment so that an individual can be manipulated more easily. And it just reminded me of that. And yeah, it's just
Yeah. Well, thanks for your comment. I was anticipating actually of a few other folks to be in the green room at this time. I see that the green room is not so full right now, and I also am noticing that because of the perhaps because of the short notice cancellation of the last show, that some folks who wanted to be online and watching live might not yet be tuned in. So I'm going to go ahead and talk just a little bit more about narcissism and the qualities of narcissism that impair a person's ability to love. And I want to first talk about the fact that these days we hear an awful lot about narcissism, which is really amazing because, frankly, it wasn't that long ago. It was maybe about 15 to 20 years ago when the medical community, in all of its wisdom, uh, actually thought about removing the category of narcissistic personality disorder from the official nomenclature. And that was because a lot of folks were feeling like it was a false construct. And some folks were even thinking that it was so hard to define that we shouldn't even include it as a personality disorder. And so it's interesting that in our day and time, we hear all kinds of things about narcissism. And unfortunately, a lot of it paints with such broad brushes. A lot of the information out there is so overgeneralized that it actually disadvantages folks as they're trying to understand this phenomenon of our age and its impact on relationships. So I'm going to have some more to say about that in just a minute. But I see we have another friend who's entered the green room who I'm anxious to talk with because he always has such good things to say. So I'm going to add him to the stage here too. And someone is saying, thank you to you, CJ, for being here.
thank you.
And I'm going to go ahead and add Brent to the stage. Hello, Brent. How are you?
Hi, good evening, good afternoon, everyone. I'm doing fine.
Good. So did you have a comment that you wanted to make today or a question you
I
wanted to ask?
I do, but I must say that I am very interested to hear about the imposters to love. I'm very interested to hear about that. So I'm going to keep my comments now a bit short because I really wanted to touch on that.
Okay.
But I would say that there are a couple of factors. First of all, human beings are introduced to so much information these days that it's impossible to get a widespread. And I think because of that, a lot of the younger generation is not coming up aware of the dangers that human beings, just relationships with human beings, can pose. So if you're just looking at memes all day or videos that you like to look at, there's a large probability that you're not going to your brain is not going to appreciate that human beings come with good and bad.
Right.
And so a lot of people are not getting the widespread of character disturbance and all that. And that naivety is really harming people, I think. So I'll keep it at that for now.
Well, you bring up a very good point. We had help with that general issue decades ago when certain traditions were more firmly in place than they are in our day and time. For example, it was not that long ago, and it still is in many cultures, where a lot of vetting went on about potential relationship partners. Family and friends didn't hesitate to venture an opinion or two about who they thought you were dating or becoming involved with. They did some homework for you often. If they cared about you, they did some background investigation, or if they noticed something that was a little troubling because they could be more objective than you could, they would say something as your friend or your relative, and they would say, you know, I know you really like this gal or this guy, but we're noticing some things, and you know, because I love you, I just thought I'd mention it to you.
Yeah.
And not only weren't folks offended by that, they appreciated that because they understood that genuine love is a cultivated thing that occurs with people who have demonstrated quite clearly over time that they have your best interest at heart,
Yes.
and that you can trust. So when you got this kind of feedback, you were more than willing to give what they had to say to you an ear and some consideration, and you appreciated it too. What happens today, unfortunately, and I don't know if this is what you were alluding to, is we pretty much expect young people to grow up all by themselves with not a lot of intensive family and support group coaching. And we expect their peers to give, who are just as unenlightened as they are, unfortunately, at that stage of their own personal development, to give them helpful advice. Well, you know, it's natural for young people at certain ages to develop a mind of their own and not and maybe even take issue with your attempts at guidance and at coaching. But at certain stages, it's absolutely critical that they get that kind of thing, not only for their own character formation, but so that they can learn how to judge the character of others,
Yes.
how to tell the good guys from the bad guys, what to look for, how to notice seduction techniques, um, how to label them for what they are, to give them only the consideration that they deserve, and how to look deeper.
Right.
Yes, Caroline.
So, what would you advise like a teenager or like, somebody in their 20s? How could they vet a person? What would be a system that they could apply to, critically question somebody's values, integrity, motives?
Right. Well, you've already gotten to the how, but the first part is the what. In other words, do the vetting. That's the most important part. Actually, make it a point to question, to research, to look into a person's background. Now, the how, what to look for, that's a part of what coaching and rearing is all about. And what I find that so many young people, especially folks growing up in what we would consider disadvantaged environments of one type or another, they neither have well-grounded family support and coaching and guidance and direction, or community based support, guidance, and direction. And both are important. What we have forgotten, and this is what I write about all the time, and this is perhaps my number one concern. We have forgotten all that it takes for human beings to be what most of us have it within us to be, character-wise. We take longer to socialize than any other creatures on the planet. Hour after hour, day by day, year after year of intensive training. And training that doesn't occur in a vacuum, training that occurs in various social milieus, some of which are completely antithetical or are completely opposed to helping nurture the decency in persons that we want them to have. And to top it off, some children have some traits in them that make the process difficult too. So when you add an unsupportive culture or an aversive oppositional culture to some difficult traits in the person, the challenge of helping folks see the value in and adopt and internalize the values and standards that can help make them the best they can be is a monumental challenge in our day and time. And we've just forgotten what it takes. We think it just happens by magic. It doesn't. It's why we're here. I'm going to get a little worked up here. It's why all manner of character dysfunction so egregious and so blatantly repulsive, at least at one time would have been regarded so. There was a time where such egregious, blatantly malignant displays of bad character would have been shocking, would have been just completely unpalatable. And they're so commonplace today that we've become desensitized to them. Not only that, some folks endorse them, champion those very traits that we once used to think were pathetic. We can only turn things around the way we got here, which is slowly, incrementally, one heart at a time, beginning with our own.
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe in that. And sometimes I get discouraged because I say the same things over and over again. And I've made this my life's work, the fruits of which have been beyond measure so far. But sometimes I get discouraged because even though I tell people when I'm coaching, even though I tell people not to either be affected by or dissuaded by results or what appear to be the results, just keep doing good as you see to do good. Even though that's what I coach people, it gets discouraging at times when I don't see movement in a better direction. As a matter of fact, it just seems to me that certain horrific character displays are getting worse. And with some pride, there's a very technical term that we have in psychology. I'll try to simplify this for listeners, but we call it egosyntonia, as opposed to another fancy term, ego dystonia. And what that means is simply this. There are some things that we learn about ourselves and the way we operate, and there are some things that we know about ourselves and the way we operate that actually bother us. That we call ego dystonia. In other words, we don't like those aspects of us, but they've become so habitual and the habits are hard to break that we keep doing some things, but we're not really happy with ourselves for doing them. And so we say to ourselves, I wish I wouldn't do that. I'm going to try to do better, et cetera, et cetera. That's the conversation we have with ourselves. Egosyntonia goes like this. Yeah, I understand how I see things, how I operate, how I do things. And I know that other people take issue with those things. And some people say that they wish I wouldn't do this or that, or act this way, or be this way. But you know what? I like who I am. I like the way I do things. Whether it appeals to you or not, this is me. Take it or leave it. I'm comfortable with this.
Hmm.
And so, what we have today, sadly, I think, is some of the more reprehensible characters not only being pleased with themselves, despite the few folks in the culture or the society who might take issue with them, but also being reinforced and championed by other folks of a similar ilk within the culture, so that there's absolutely no incentive to change. For me, this is the heartbreak. This is the heartbreak. No incentive to grow, to be better, to rise to a different level.
I I have a more positive note on that. I understand where you're coming from, George, but I believe in the power of one's own soul. And to me, the last thing that you just, mentioned, that people champion on this behavior, I think it comes from yearning the connection within oneself. And so if we see somebody who asserts, hey, I know who I am, and you know what, I like it, and that's who I am, you deal with it, we look up to that because we that's something we yearn for, like that connection with ourselves, to be okay with ourselves, to be able to accept ourselves for who we are. And I think, in a way, all the solutions are really there to increase the awareness of one's own true moral compass and instinct. I feel that ties back to, for example, you said how to recognize, how to vet, bad characters, for example. I think in the beginning, everybody has at some point an instinct, but we don't listen to it because there's not the awareness to listen and recognize that instinct and to take it seriously. Um, I also think it comes into place. I think everybody has a true moral compass. And I think somehow everybody finds different words, but more times than not, the moral compasses are more alike than they are really different, you know. And but there again, like, what is the true moral compass, and what is the compass that we want it to be? Right? The second one is the one we make up with our minds, and the first one is how we truly feel it. But to connect to that, and I think that's what we need most help with, and that's where we need to help young people to connect with their instinct, their true sentiments, like a process to acknowledge it, become aware of it, and then really also take it seriously, more seriously than if anybody else talked to them, more than social media talk to them, or
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. And this time, I think you've got the what um, really well. I think the what is exactly what you said it is. I think that folks are very hungry to connect with those certain aspects of themselves, and many times they find, say, for instance, the confidence that they lack and are yearning for themselves in somebody else who seems more than pleased with themselves. And they say to themselves, boy, I wish I had more of that. And
Hmm.
I think you're absolutely right on that. So the question is, how? How do we, in this day and time, especially where people are distracted is not the best word, but there are so many things that pull us away from this all important, noble task of growing ourselves to the best that we can be. This really challenging task of self development and growth and self awareness and enlightenment there are so many distractions. There are so many things that pull us away from the task, things that seem so important, but in the big scheme of things aren't. Only like, for example, if you're on the verge of losing everything, or if you're on the verge of even death, and there's only a few precious moments left, then all of a sudden what's really important comes to the fore and what's not important fades away. But in day-to-day life, these distractions constantly bombard us. So my question for both of you is, what's the how? How in this kind of crazy, distracted world where we're so busy with so many of the things that don't really matter as much, how do we make the space and the time and put forth the energy to do precisely what you're saying we need to do?
All right. Wow. Well, I'm sure you can appreciate this is a difficult question, but I'll take a try at it.
Okay.
The first, as a prelude to what I want to say here, discernment is key. Discernment is key, right? As you said, there are a lot of things that are presenting as they should be important in our lives, and they're actually not that important, right? And for that reason, a lot of people are scrolling all day on their devices, looking at things that aren't that important. So we do need to gradually get better at our discernment. What is worth putting our energies into? What is just focusing on the more important things. So that's a prelude. Now I'm saying, and this will kind of answer Caroline's question of earlier, what does a young person do? It's really difficult to expect a young person to have discernment without having that discernment given to them by their parents or by older persons in society. It's difficult. But nevertheless, let's move forward on that. A young person has to have the discernment to align themselves with the people, the older individuals or even their peers who are more serious, who have that level of discernment. You need a community. And to be honest with you, I really can appreciate that now. Dr. Simon touched on it earlier, that those are the things in earlier times, a few decades ago, we had family members, we had grandparents, we had godparents, remember those, that would really, look after us and give us the information even before the thing happened. We need community. And we're in a time where people are more individualistic, but here's the important truth. The knowledge that you seek is not in you. Someone else has to give it to you. Someone more experienced, at least has to bring it to your attention, right? So, and lastly, let me just. It's unfortunate that because we're kind of digitized, that we now have to do things like forums and stuff like that. And I'm going to shout out somebody here, a good friend of yours, Dr. Simon, Chump Lady, right? And my experience on her forums, right? There were a group of people there that would say, listen, would you probably post there and they would say, okay, look, listen for this red flag, look out for this red flag. And those are the things that we are missing. Other people to give us, introduce us to better values, right? It's really difficult for children at this time. I make no mistake about that. But the way forward is to find a group of individuals who truly can guide you in the right way.
Yes. But you're correct also in that we are just, we're busy.
Yes.
We're busy with so many self pursuits that what we need from each other in the way of community support is hard to come by, especially when the divisions among us seem to be so intense. The polarization that has grown within us in just about every micro community you can think of. Even our spiritual disciplines, our faith disciplines, have fractured into literally a million pieces. There are so many, each one saying to the other, "Oh, you almost have it right, but you've got this wrong. So we're going to do our own thing, and we're going to do it our way." And it's really hard to talk to one another. You have to make that effort. Um, and it's happened politically really seriously in the last few decades. The polarization has gotten really great. And talk about painting with broad brushes. I hear people talk about liberals and conservatives like there's absolutely no middle ground. You're either this or you're that. And you're either horribly misguided and stupid or you're on the right side of things. And there's no in between. So it's really hard to have an open and truly honest conversation because most conscientious folks don't want to offend somebody else. They want to be able to state an opinion or to share a sentiment without fear of being condemned or belittled or discounted. But it's hard to do that. Yes, Caroline.
So I have this theory, and I wonder what you think about that. That one reason why it's hard for us to talk to other people is because we lack the experience of communicating with ourselves. I mean, like, means listening to ourselves, acknowledging like what is really going on, like thoughts, emotions, not judging them and then working through them. And I think therefore it becomes then also difficult for us to communicate with other people because we're out of touch with ourselves to begin with, so we don't have that footing, that anchoring, that we're really coming from a centered, grounded, genuine in a way place. But that's my theory. And what do you think about that?
Well, I think it's extremely deep what you're just saying here. I think it's very deep. And I agree with you 100%. I think that in a hedonistic, narcissistic age where there's so much available that can bring you a momentary something, whether it be just pure stimulation or some kind of momentary satisfaction where it can attract you, where there are so many things that take you out, that cause you to look outside of yourself. It's so easy to lose touch with yourself. One of my favorite quotes from Teilhard de Chardin is that we are not human creatures or looking for a spiritual experience. We are spiritual beings having a human experience. And in these times, the human experience takes us away from our core spiritual selves. We forget who we are. Sometimes we don't even know who we are because so early on, we are drawn out to this world that has so many offerings to distract us. And we place our faith in people, in places, and things that can bring us momentary pleasure, but not happiness.
But don't you think that's something that could be learned, like, through education, be it like what we're doing in this podcast, to just somehow create the energy, and whoever is gravitating towards us or listening to it can take whatever they want? or maybe even schools, like that there would be something embedded of helping children to get in touch with themselves, to have maybe some silent moments where people would tune into what thoughts come up or feelings come up, and they journal it, and so they can read it, so it becomes a certain awareness, manifested awareness, and then you have tools to work through it. Something like that. It could be games, that you invent that people can play. I mean, am I too
Yeah.
positive?
What, Caroline is showing why I love her so much. I've known her for a while now, and she is so deep.
Oh my God, too
And,
deep.
and also she has the gift for many times putting into words what into the right words what I'd like to be able to say. I agree 100% once again. And learning those things used to be the primary, I shouldn't say purpose, the primary mission of all of the major spiritual disciplines. As a matter of fact, the word itself, the word religion, comes from the Latin religio, which means to reconnect or to rebind. You can look it up. I'm not making this up. That's exactly what the word means. And so most of the world's religion developed as a way to help us reconnect to our core self, where the divine resides. And then they all became, or most of them became, quite institutionalized, because that's what monument constructing men do. That's what monument constructing men do. They build things. They build towers and obelisks and skyscrapers and whatnot to tout ego all over the place, see what we can do, which is really the main point of the Babel story, But my point being that we've even the movements, and they all started as movements, even the movements that began as a way to help us reconnect have failed in their primary mission, which is why, and this is where I have hope. I've said this many times. My sole source of hope for the future is that I know firsthand, because I consult with people all over the world every day of the week. I know how hungry people are underneath it all for something way more than they're getting in this titillation filled, pleasure of the moment filled, overly distracting world that has all kinds of things to fill you up for a split second and then leave you empty. They are starving for something more. And we've let them down, because when they turn to the things that are supposed to do that, they find nothing there of any real help.
Well, if I may, I really believe that I'm gonna put it this way. It really depends on some individuals hunkering down and saying, you know what, this character thing is very much a crisis. Our institutions have failed us. I have to do something. It's first a call to introspect. It's first a call for me to rise to the level of character that to a higher level than we see on average today. And that comes with sacrifice. That comes with discipline. That comes with looking at a hedonistic world, as you said, and deciding, okay, I'm not going to indulge. I'm not going to, you know, it comes at some kind of cost. I'm going to use you, Dr. Simon, as an example. You could have easily gone with the mainstream narrative of character disturbance. And I'm pretty sure you would have great, a great response out there. Your name could be, but you made a sacrifice. You said, you know what, I can't afford to put out a narrative that leaves people hungry, leaves them empty, right? I have to, and you've done that, and that has come with a cost, right? I'm saying that we need individuals. We need to do exactly what we're doing. Make the decisions in our own lives, share the message as far as we can, and hopefully there are some serious-minded persons that are going to start to do things. And I really like Carolyn's idea. I'll end with this. I really like Carolyn's idea of, in terms of, okay, well, let's make this into a set of activities. Let's make this into a course that people could take. But you know what? I, pardon me as I say this. We have to accept that our institutions have failed us. We kind of accept that, and then do what we can.
Yeah. I think you're right about that, Brent. And I think that you have to come to a certain point in life, even if you're already a fairly decent person who's been conscientiously working on developing yourself, you have to come to a certain point in life where you really fully appreciate that we're all connected and that everything we do has impact, and therefore we have an obligation to be a part of a movement to make things better as opposed to making things worse. Wouldn't it be nice if we could help that process along a little earlier, helping our folks who are searching and who are struggling and who naturally at early stages in life are kind of lost, and are not sure where to go or how to even manage all these things. If they could sense trustworthy support, guidance, if they could trust the institutions that were designed to help foster their growth. I respect the hunger. And I have to say, Brent, in response to what you said about what I have done, I feel compelled, obligated. And I know I'm losing both some steam and I'm physically losing my voice. So one of these days, I won't even be able to talk anymore. But I feel compelled. Something drives me. And it's not like I think I can fix the world. I mean, that's ludicrous. It's grandiose. That's not the point. The point is more, what is life if it's not about the business of loving and continually discerning through all life has to teach us what love's real nature is? Because in my faith discipline, God is love. And so it's simple arithmetic. It's simple math. If that's true, then loving is godly. And the more loving I become, the more godly I become. Which seems on the surface to be grandiose, but it's not. It's not. And the cross involved in that is hard. But it gets much easier. Scott Peck wrote in The Road Less Traveled, those burdens become a lot easier when you accept how hard it is. As soon as you say to yourself, yeah, this road is hard, but you know what? I'm taking it on anyway. The burden gets just a little easier when you have that change of heart to take up the burden and do what you can. And out of a sense of gratitude, what a miracle we have before us. And like Caroline said earlier, the reason we can't see it, reason we can't appreciate it, has to do with what we haven't dealt with yet in ourselves.
Yeah.
But we are bearing witness to the most undeserved but miraculous gift that anyone could even imagine. This gift of life and existence. We also have this incredible gift of being able to freely offer back, not like a machine, but of our own volition, to freely offer back the love that we've already been shown. But right now, we're in a hedonistic, a narcissistic age, the likes of which we haven't seen in a long time. So it's harder than ever. And our young folks need us more than ever. They don't just need any old us. They need some enlightened us's to help them along. They need some folks who have done their own inner work, as Caroline suggested, who have gotten to know themselves and all that's going on in there. And boy, that task seems almost monumental today. But we'll keep on trying, won't we? We'll all do our best.
I think we're on our way, I believe nature has always comes in waves, and I believe that everybody, including the institutions, are in some way doing their best. They're doing, my best when I have a bad day is very different than if I have a good day. So I believe maybe right now that best of an institution or people is different than in another era. And I just believe that all the answers are within oneself, but not in a narcissistic way. So I think that's something that needs differentiation. Narcissistic
Yes,
is always painted as looking at yourself and putting yourself into center. I say you have to put yourself in the center, but in an honest way of like, what am I really feeling? Connecting with that truth.
right.
But not so it's
Right.
kind of like almost the opposite of narcissist, even though it focuses on you. And there's a lot of people that can't
Absolutely.
distinguish that. So it's
Right.
kind
And actually, that's in the ancient myth that we get the term narcissism from. Narcissus didn't fall in love with himself. He fell in love with his image. That's different. Looking good is not the same as being good.
Yes.
It's the image that I guess he did a commercial for a camera, for Nikon cameras. Image is everything. There's some truth to that in a narcissistic age.
so are you
Genuine
saying
self-love is different.
so are you saying he fell in love with how other people see him?
With that idealized image of having all this talent, all this capability, all this beauty, all these gifts from God claimed as one's own without any gratitude and without any obligation to give back. Ego is an acronym, as Wayne Dyer says, for edging God out. Where ego is, there's no room for a higher anything. It's just really that simple. I can't believe the hour's almost over.
Wow,
My little clock here says we have 20 some seconds for me to wrap this up. You guys made it so easy. I'm so happy to see you both.
Thank you.
And glad my voice held out at least long enough. And I hope folks will go to the blog and start tuning into the series that began with this last post and will avail themselves of this video online, and tune in again in 2 weeks for the next live edition of Character Matters. Thanks, both of you, for participating. Love to you both. And see you next time, maybe. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Well, we've ended the stream.